This video is going to look at this stylistic concept called the vivid or historic present that is outlined on page 23 in the Building the Meaning section in chapter 30 of Ecce Romani. Here's a passage. I'm going to read through this, and as I do that, follow along, and what I'd like you to do is take special notice of the verbs in this passage. Last weekend, I went to South Bend for the Notre Dame game. I met up with my old roommates at the grocery store, and we bought all kinds of food for a tailgate. We drove together and found a spot to park in the parking lot. I'm standing in the lot eating an undercooked burger, and I see Jimmy Clausen walking around. I ask him, "Aren't you supposed to be playing in the NFL this weekend?" I'm going to read that one more time. And again, follow along. Notice every verb as I come across it in this paragraph and try and figure out what's going on with these verbs. I'll read it a little slower the second time through. Last weekend, I went to South Bend for the Notre Dame game. I met up with my old roommates at the grocery store, and we bought all kinds of food for a tailgate. We drove together and found a spot to park in the parking lot. I am standing in the lot eating an undercooked burger, and I see Jimmy Clausen walking around. I ask him, "Aren't you supposed to be playing in the NFL this weekend?" Hopefully, by looking at those verbs, you notice two very different things going on with the verbs in this paragraph. First, we see these verbs went, met, bought, drove, found. What do those all have in common? They're all in the past tense. But after that verb found, there's a shift that takes place, isn't there? There's now the verbs am standing, eating, see, walking, ask, aren't, and be playing. All those are in the present tense. So what we have here in the space of one paragraph, one story, if you will, there's a shift from verbs that are in the past tense to verbs that are in the present tense. And there's a certain effect that is accompanied with that shift. It goes from me telling a story of what happened to all of a sudden telling that story in the present tense. Obviously, it's not occurring right now. When I'm telling that story, I'm not standing in a parking lot, I'm not eating a burger, and I don't see Jimmy Clausen. But by having those verbs in the present tense, it makes it a little more vivid. It's almost like a flashback in a movie where maybe, if I'm a good enough storyteller, it makes the listener feel like they're a part of that story as well. This technique, this stylistic technique, is called the vivid or historic present. And it adds vividness or excitement or speed to a story that takes place in the past. We do it all the time if you think about it. Even just the simple sentence, "I saw a guy walking down the street and I'm thinking to myself, blah, blah, blah." Even right there, I saw a guy and then I'm thinking to myself. No, I was thinking to myself. But when I tell that to somebody else, I use that present tense verb to make it a little more emphatic, to make it a little more vivid. So this shift to verbs that are in the present tense can occur in any kinds of story. It can occur in a Latin story. But when we see it in Latin, when that shift takes place to verbs that are grammatically in the present tense, we can still translate those as if they were in the past tense. That's an important point. Let me show you what I mean. Here are the first 7 lines of chapter 30, and we spent a lot of time in class translating that second paragraph into English. It's a great example of a vivid present. So let's take a look at the verbs and see how it works. Our first verb is obscurabat. That's the imperfect tense because of the BA. Our next verb, poterat, also imperfect. The third verb, concursabant, another imperfect verb. But now look what happens. Aguntur, that's present tense. It's also passive, like we learned in the first 2 videos. Efferuntur, also present passive. Trahuntur, present passive. Eikiuntur, present passive. Honuntur, present passive. So we have a shift. Those first 3 verbs are imperfect, 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 and then all of a sudden we switch to present, 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 present. This is exactly what that vivid or historic present technique is all about. If we wanted to come up with a translation of that paragraph, we would start by saying, "Soon, smoke was obscuring everything. Cornelia was barely able to see the building itself. Many men were running around here and there." Now we get to the sentence ab in colis. Most literally, we would say, at the same time, everything is being done by the tenants. But since this is actually happening in the past, probably a better way to translate it that would make more sense is, at the same time, everything was being done by the tenants. We could then go on to translate, infants were being carried out of the building by their mothers. The weak were being dragged out the doors. possessions were being thrown out the windows, in the streets were placed trunks, beds, and furniture. Is it wrong to translate those verbs as present like they are in the paragraph? No, it's not. But a Latin author would want us to notice that and want us to realize that those present tense verbs are actually in the past. So we should probably translate them that way. Again, this is a great example of that vivid present, the historic present. It makes us feel as if we are included into this story. It makes it a little more significant, a little more emphatic, and a little more vivid. That's why we call it the vivid present. This is a small grammatical point in the grand scheme of things, but as we go on and get more comfortable in Latin, especially real Latin from real Latin authors, we are going to see this technique used more and more often. So it's something that's good to learn and it's good to be familiar with. I'd recommend going back to chapter 29, and as you look through that chapter, try and translate it and see if you can identify any vivid or historic presence. This will be good practice for you in learning this concept.